About 9 months ago, my partner and I had just bought a new 6-month-old boxer dog to keep our 3-year-old Labrador company. We decided it would be a good idea to take them for a walk in the countryside. We live close to a large city called Hull in northeast England, and decided to go for a walk in a ruralish area north of the River Humber that ran to the sea. Upon getting to a village close to a landmark, a World War II Army fort, we decided to walk near it and through the small patches of forest close to the nature reserve. We walked along a grass bunker towards the forest, and suddenly my partner pointed out 2 young men that had began walking up the bank from the woods in a diagonal manner, as if they were trying to cut us off. I wondered if the young men were attending some kind of World War II reenactment, as both of them were wearing camouflage pants and were also covered in dirt. I thought nothing of them, as I was sure they would pass by, but as they drew closer, it appeared they were aimingly walking towards us. They were at least 10 feet away when they stopped, and one of them spoke. The way he spoke still bothers me to this day, as he seemed to have a disregard for manners or even trying to make sense. The young man wanted to know where we were planning on walking, and we told him we were not really sure, and we would just see where we ended up. The young man looked disappointed by this, and suggested that we take his route, which went through the forest, to what he described as a great place to sightsee, and that there were benches to sit down. While the young man was telling us this, the other boy kept watching our 2 dogs almost constantly, as if he wanted to make sure that they were in his sight at all times. We did not have much knowledge of this area, and had not seen any other dog walkers, so we took the young man's advice after he pointed to an opening in the woods, and we walked on. The woods cast out about 30% of the sunlight, and as I looked back, I saw the young men had not walked off, but were watching us walk into the forest. The track looked as though it was man-made, as it seemed to be the only walkable area throughout that forest. About 2 minutes into our trek, our Labrador began sniffing behind a bramble bush, which at first we thought nothing of, as both dogs sniff everywhere they can when we walk them. However, she began sniffing in one spot and rolling on the ground. We went over to her, and she was sniffing some sort of shattered rubber pig mast with brown-red liquid on it. It looked disgusting, and my partner forced the dog away from it, as it looked as though flies were crawling all around it. Further into the walk, the woods had turned into a long path of trees and bushes that had become very narrow, but we could see a turn far ahead, and we agreed that if it led nowhere, we would turn back. I walked ahead, and was on my phone preparing to take a photo of the woods, when I felt several small pricks in my neck, chin, and part of my face. I let out a gasp to alert my partner, and he told me to stand still in an alarmed way, followed by him carefully removing thin pieces of string away from my face. As it turns out, someone had tied fishing hooks on a line to a tree in the walkway. It's safe to say that we were both terrified, confused, and angry after this point, and hurried back to the car and left back to home. I don't want to sound cliché or anything, but as we drove off, I swear I could see someone through the back mirror peek out into the road. I don't know 100% whether or not the person who laid out the fish hooks were the people we talked to, although it would make sense. My previous job entailed me to be sent around to various people's houses to assess whether or not they could support children, and I would usually be sent to collect them to take them into safer accommodations. Now, I live in a town called Hull, in northeast England, so I'm usually called out to various locations around the city, to places like council estates and such. But this was the first time I was called out to the countryside. I was sent to a village at about 9 p.m., surrounded by miles of farmland, about 7 miles away from the whole town, to take a 2-year-old child into safer accommodations. We usually have a lot of info on file when we are going to houses to give us an idea of what to expect, a history of violence, etc. In this case, however, The only known thing about the family was that they had been looked upon many times for accusations of child neglect and extreme racism. I approached the house and parked outside next to a fence. It was a tall brick house about 30 feet away from a wheat field, and the house next to it looked as though it was abandoned. I was always instructed to take pictures from different angles of the house and garden when I went to a house, so I did before approaching the front door. I did the usual and knocked many times for around 5 minutes, as this would usually get people's attention. This resulted in me hearing a window from around the back of the house open. I turned towards the tall gate to the back garden and went inside. The garden had slightly cut grass in the center, and nettles and thorns all the way around the brick and wood fences that closed off the whole garden like a fort. In one corner, there were around 6 animal hutches, which I guessed had ferrets in them, as the visible food bowls had various dead birds inside as feed. In the window that had been opened sat a boy, who I later found out to be 17, with his legs hanging out of it. I snapped a picture of him and told him why I was there, and that he needed to let me in as the child needed to be taken into care. He proceeded to raise his voice in denial that there was any kid there, and began banging on the window every time I said something. He eventually got to the stage of being verbally abusive, and throwing nails and bolts out of the window onto the conservatory, which produced a loud thudding sound. I was just about to call for my supervisor when I heard the sound of an infant crying. To my confusion, the crying was coming from behind me, towards one of the ferret hutches, which caused me to turn around quickly and approach the sound. I unwrapped the waterproof cover off of one of the hutches, and saw the child I had been sent to collect in the corner shaking, covered in straw. The child had red sore skin and scratches on his neck and arms. I quickly grabbed the child, and by now the boy in the window was on the phone, shouting to someone about the current situation, telling him to get his arse over here. I sat in my car and put the child in the booster seat before setting off out of the village to the bypass. As soon as I turned the corner, I saw a boy about the same age as the boy in the window, wearing a camouflaged army trench coat, holding a mallet, standing right in the middle of the road, blocking my path. His face had no expression. With his eyes wide open, he started moving towards me. I had already turned onto the road, but I knew that he would surely approach me if I continued, so I put it in reverse and went down the back roads back to Hull. After I had handed the child in with the file, I told my supervisor about the incident, and the authorities were called. The boy in the window was questioned, and denied having ever been near that house. However, my picture of him was proof against that. Nothing was found out about the boy in the camo coat, and he was not tied to the case. I never found out where the infant's parents were, but I never looked into it. If you enjoyed this video, you know what to do. I'd like to give a special thank you to Tula Janita and Da Chair for submitting these stories to me. Both of these stories were originally posted on Reddit, but they were nice enough to actually send them to me as a submission. I'll have a link to their YouTube channels in the description. I hope you enjoyed this special little location-themed video. I found it pretty crazy that both of these stories took place so close to each other, probably within 25 miles of each other. That alone is pretty crazy. If you would like to share your story, I'll have all the information on how to do so in the description. I'll catch you all in the next video, and just remember, it's always scarier if it's true.